Welcome, everyone. Today I'd like to discuss briefly where Friedrich Hayek, and John Maynard Keynes, who were fiery enemies while they were both alive and tried to have a huge impact, and also both did have a massive impact on their own time and actually also on ours and the decades to come with their respective economic theories, how they differ philosophically. And you may know this, you may not know this. I studied PPE in Italy and the US, philosophy, politics, and economics. And in Italy, you have to write a thesis at the end, which is at the end of your degree, your bachelor's, which is almost as long as a British PhD thesis, which is also quite striking. So I wrote about 50 or 60,000 words on Hayek. And I'm now going over this again and want to present a few things going forward, also more on economics in general, but also how this will come at some later stage. How well we should start rethinking economics, but in order to get there, we also need first to reconsider the theories that shaped or that continue to shape our time economically, and also where those again themselves find their source. With Keynes, I'll just mention this briefly. Keynes is a striking um, figure in terms of his vision for um, the future. He he presents in an essay entitled "The Economic Possibilities for Our Children" a what to some I would presume is a utopian society, to others is dystopian, as is always the case with utopia. It is always both. To summarize or to simplify what Keynes there almost 100 years ago presents, or actually uh, lays out, is what he sees as inevitable if we follow what he suggests we do. He sees as almost inevitable in the 21st century, we would be his grandchildren, that we will have become so rich that everyone could live off the substance, as he calls it, forevermore. But in order to get there, to the lilies in the field, for some reason quoting Matthew, we must be greedy. He says in 1930, we must be usurious to amass such financial and material wealth that our grandchildren would not have to work. Now, Keynes, again, hugely impactful on the political scene with 1948, the Bretton Woods Agreement, etc., in terms of his thinking, which, by the way, quite near to Bertrand Russell's In Praise of Idleness, a very similar idea. They're more with a focus on how technology will liberate us from the burden of work, and what that might mean for the masses. The hoi polloi, I mean, Bertrand Russell is, of course, too polite to call it that, but that's what he means. He's quite, I think, afraid of what people would do if they had too much time on their hand, which is why he praises idleness again once more, which, of course, would never have been, or should never have been, available to the peasantry. Anyway, so Hayek and Keynes are both subjectivists. They differ, however, greatly in their policy suggestions, an understanding of the economy, which comes down to their different form of subjectivity that they subscribe to. So completely different branches, however, of course, of the same tree. So their philosophical foundations inform their market theories, and by discussing the former, their philosophical foundations, that will shed some light, I think, on the reasons for the intellectual dispute. And I think thereby we can also show the difference between Hayek and Keynes' respective school of thought. Keynes is a rationalist in the Cartesian sense. Nevertheless, Keynes accepts the empiricist's claim of experience as a prerequisite of knowledge. But his epistemology is impossible if there is not a priori reasoning or categories in place also. So there must be, for Keynes, put it simply, a priori reasoning, which is not to be confused, by the way, with Hayek's categories of the mind, because for Hayek, the categories of the mind are formed by experience, while in Keynes, those are given, quite Kantian, Cartesian in a sense. So there is an infallible epistemological authority in this tradition, the Cartesian tradition, broadly speaking, to which Keynes subscribes. And as you may know, Hayek, of course, opposes this. Such an infallible authority does not exist. Now, as you may know, Keynes did not trust the market to create a stable order. This is what Hayek believes, given also his origins in the Scottish Enlightenment, who thought that a spontaneous order could emerge through the self-interested actions by people, but also, of course, not just their self-interested actions, but their self-interested actions are always also accompanied by sympathy. Now, one reason why Keynes did not trust just the market to provide a stable order is because he perceives the social world to be, funnily enough, non-Cartesian. So that's to say, human behavior is necessarily wildly irrational in the sense that most human beings lack the ability soundly to calculate, and hence the social world is for Keynes, again ironically, almost non-Cartesian. Which is also why he's quite skeptical, at least officially, about long-term expectations. But even though we've just seen in his essay on the future economic possibilities of our grandchildren, he does actually present a long-term expectation in which we're not just all dead in the long run. There must thus be a certain instance which determines the direction of society by formulating common goals and thereby maintaining social order. So Keynes does think there must be a central planning committee which is capable of reaching Cartesian certainty. Keynes called the human urge to act animal spirit, again also in reference to Descartes. And this is not a negative notion, as, now to quote from Keynes, individual initiative will only be adequate when reasonable calculation is supplemented and supported by animal spirits, so that the thought of ultimate loss which often overtakes pioneers, as experience undoubtedly tells us in them, is put aside as a healthy man puts aside the expectation of death. End of quote. Animal spirits are thus a necessary property of man in Keynes' theory. Yet one cannot rely on these spontaneous urges for the maintenance of order. And this is contrary to Hayek, where the evolutionary process or processes spontaneously deliver market and consequently for Hayek social order. Hayek trusted order, cosmos, to originate out of itself from unintended consequences by individual actions. For Hayek, unintended consequences, as must necessarily spring from actions driven by animal spirits, cannot by themselves lead to a good order of society as a whole, or to any order at all, for that matter. It takes a central organ which can induce intended results and create intuitions and circumstances which allow for social order to be maintained. Now, if you're interested in this, have a look at chapter 12 of Keynes' General Theory for a discussion on animal spirits. The market thus does not serve as the creator of order, as in Hayek's Great Society, but rather the market itself needs to be ordered, regulated. It is crucial then to understand that Hayek's and Keynes' respective philosophical backgrounds largely inform their theories. Hayek did not believe, who was a follower of the Scottish Enlightenment, that central planning or regulation of the market have a good impact on society, as this would destroy the natural order of the market. Hayek does say on the road to serfdom that the market is a tool we have found in nature. To regulate the market would mean to try and regulate nature. Consequently, he doesn't put it like this, but that's what we can infer from what he says. Keynes was not willing to accept that good order would emerge only spontaneously. His conception also allows for the emergence of spontaneous disorder. The social world is to a great extent irrational in Keynes, compared with the rational basic structure of the world. This substructure, however, allows for decent planning even in the realm of the social world, when basing one's desired outcome on probability calculation. Relying merely on spontaneous forces, precisely in the times of the 1930s, seemed foolish not only to Keynes at the time. For Hayek, however, Keynes' proposal did not depict a middle ground or a middle path, but a disguised version of socialism. Horowitz has therefore suggested that Hayek published The Sensory Order in order to show that his epistemological reasons for objecting Keynes and the neoclassicists so this was the reason he published this book, to show that we need a different epistemology to ground our economic theory. The Hayek's and Keynes dispute runs so deeply since their respective notions of rationalism or their philosophical groundings are so vastly different. And in Keynes, we see Cartesian rationalism, which is also constructivist, which allows on the rational substructure to construct a good social order that has a pre-desired order, which does not come about spontaneously. And for Hayek, that is fundamentally the issue of modernity, is this attempt to control and bring about through control what cannot be controlled. So this leads to a good order on the surface, perhaps, but ultimately to destruction of freedom and to, well, to quote Hayek, it leads to serfdom. Hence we see that in economic discourse, which unfortunately today never really considers any longer any of the great economic minds of the past couple hundred years. But still, if we want to figure out what is going on, we need to consider also how these economists thought of the world, what was their world vision, what was their world view, in order to be able ourselves to maybe take from each of them what they got right and what they got wrong, in order to articulate a new grand economic theory that goes beyond just the pale old capitalism, socialism distinction. Thank you very much for listening.